Great. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you for all my panel members that are with us today. It's another one of our webinars that we have been trying to put on. They started around the COVID time, and hope everybody is staying as well as possible. We've done a number of these webinars over the last months, and today's will be focused on a specific topic. I'm representing the academic initiative that's part of the American Academy of Neurology, and I'll be introducing some of our important task force members that are part of this webinar today. So there have been a number of these now, and these are all recorded. We started out with sharing best practices during COVID, and there were two specifically right about that topic, including hearing directly from some New York City chairs and business administrators. We talked about reactivation, and we were reactivating in terms of clinical operations, education and training, and these are all recorded. Next slide. Some others, after the events in Minnesota occurred, we pivoted and had a special one regarding systemic racism, and I hope you've by now heard of some of the American Academy of Neurology's task force recommendations that will be implemented to combat systemic racism and equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we'll even touch a little bit on today how you incorporate some of that in your strategic planning. We dealt with managing financial repercussions of COVID-19 in neurology departments, and then resetting operations, research operations, particularly in neurology departments during COVID. Next slide. And then we began to pivot. If you remember, we had a chair summit that was disbanded because of COVID. We had our third chair summit was supposed to occur in March of 2020, and we took it on the road, and some of the things that the group had been working on, we decided to pivot them into special webinars. So one was adapting your department for coding changes, lessons learned from long-term EEG, and preparing for some of the changes that CMS has with coding, and then faculty compensation models, trials and tribulations we had in December. So this in 2021 is the first one in 2021 that we're doing, and we have a few others planned on division directors and how to handle divisions in departments. We have another one planned on the gender gap in salary and some others that you'll be hearing about. Next slide. Today's grew out of the work of some of the people that are part of this webinar today. They had planned a breakout session at the Chair's Retreat, or the Chair Summit, and it was focused on strategic planning and execution, particularly during a dynamically changing environment. In the age of COVID, some of us have had strategic plans, either institutional or departmental based, and obviously COVID has thrown a wrench into some of them. So we thought it'd be important to try to offer some viewpoints from different departments, chairs, as well as from some business administrators from academic departments, of what their approach has been, sort of the nuts and bolts a little bit of strategic planning. Next slide. I really have a great panel. And like I said, some of these members were part of planning this originally. So we have Todd Barnes, who's the academic business administrator for the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. Kevin Clark, who's the executive administrator for Emory University, their academic department. David Hafler, who's chair of neurology at Yale University School of Medicine. Francis Jensen, chair of neurology at the University of Pennsylvania Health System. And Matt Rizzo, who's chair of neurology at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. So I think all different departments of sizes and structures, and that you'll hear a little bit about what their approach has been to strategic planning. So as we get started here, remember, use the Q&A if you have questions. I thought we would just start by hearing from each of our panel members a little bit. One, do they have a strategic plan that, say, is either departmental specific or institutional based? And some institutions are medical schools as well as health systems. And if they do, what their basic approach has been. Keeping it short, we'll hear from each of you, and obviously we'll be able to go into some more detail as we move forward. Why don't we start hearing first? I was going to call on Kevin from Emory. Tell us a little bit about, do you have one, what it's all about, briefly, and just give us a feel for what Emory does.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Sacco. I really appreciate that introduction and the question. We do, in fact, have a strategic plan at Emory. We actually have a service line structure in which our brain health center kind of houses all of our neurosciences, and neurology being obviously a huge component of that. And so we start with a strategic plan at the brain health center level for the service line across the continuum of care, and then kind of have each one of our departmental plans kind of hang off of that, which offers an opportunity to create some really nice alignment, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And then as we're thinking about kind of how do we make sure it's relevant in the current environment and kind of looking to the future, our thoughts are not changing the structure necessarily, but making the plans a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit more operationally focused. For example, how do we enhance the efficiency of telemedicine? So, focusing a little bit more on some of those operational aspects. But yes, in fact, we have a strategic plan at a number of different levels that allows us to create some alignment.
So you've built in some kind of adaptability and flexibility, particularly during COVID or other changes that are occurring at an institution that could be helpful. That's an important concept. At the University of Oklahoma, Todd, you've talked to us a little bit about what it's like, and it's very specific to some areas. Tell us a little about what your approach has been.
So overarchingly, the school has had strategic plans in the past. At a school level, not really have one currently, dealing with clinical especially, and there's some reasons for that institutionally. Departmentally, we've tried to align with those, but really over the last 4 or 5 years, haven't really had a departmental overall strategic plan that dealt with all the aspects of education, clinic, research. We've done some smaller ones around recruiting in certain key areas, knowing kind of what was being built at the hospital or recruiting in other departments, and prioritizing areas that we needed more people in. But as an overarching plan, we really haven't had one in quite a while, institutionally or departmentally.
So not a huge comprehensive plan, but a very needs-specific plan that then gets molded. If you probably patch together all the needs-specific ones, you'd have a comprehensive one. But another interesting and important approach, sometimes the comprehensive one has to be fragmented down to the needs-specific parts anyway. At Yale, David, tell us a little about your approach, which I hear is a little bit more institutionally driven. Oh, David, you're muted, sorry.
That's how we start all conversations. We have really 2 parallel plans, one from the network from Yale New Haven Hospital, the other from the Yale School of Medicine. And just really reflecting, I went back and asked, did we really have a strategic plan? We did, but what I've come to realize is it's very much reactionary to the environment around us. So as we are acquiring hospitals as a big part of the network, we then react to it and then quickly adapt with a plan for how we hire doctors and neurologists. We also have a service line. We partner with the neurosurgeons in terms of the institutional, the hospital plans. And then there's the strategic plan from the medical school in terms of research, which we're having a very large institutional strategic plan involving neurology, neurosurgery, psychiatry, and child health around brain health. And clinical research and how that will integrate across the system. And the question is how that integrates with the hospital is actually my phone call right after this meeting.
Yeah, that's always tricky. We have the same thing. Brain health happens to be one of our areas, and heard that was important for
I thought
Kevin.
that was our idea, brain health.
No, sorry, brain health. I think we're all doing it, but it's a great way to bring multiple disciplines together. But you're right about some of the, I wouldn't call it tension, but the integration, and we'll come back to that, of how you integrate across the health system, particularly if the health system, say, isn't even owned by the university, and there's some that are like that. And then obviously the academic mission, the academic enterprise, which is research as well as education. How about Matt at the University of Nebraska? What has been, your thoughts and approach to strategic planning?
So we definitely have a strategic plan. Without a strategy, you're always sort of playing whack-a-mole and reacting. We want to move forward, and we move forward in alignment with our mission and our vision. So we have a vision statement, and it's not just one strategic plan, it's multiple plans, and it's along the lines of clinical, research, education, outreach. We also throw in administration and other things. We have to align with the institution or we can't succeed. You can't fight the hospital. You can't fight the chancellor. You have to go along. You're part of the institution. We do this every year. We revise and modify along the way. We have clear goals and milestones and metrics, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But the strategic plan is essential, and we have one.
Great. And then Francis at Penn, I know you've talked to us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about your approach.
Well, I could echo many things that were already said. So in the interest of time, it is very dynamic what's out there. And I kind of tend to think of it, we tend to think of it like, what is our place? What's our signature strengths, vis-a-vis national, international, regional, network, and then the hospital system. And what does the department actually hold that's unique and really of high value? So we kind of start there. And actually, because of all the things that have just been said, that there's so much changing. If you start to be overly prescriptive with the operations, you rapidly realize that we just looked at our strategic plan from 7 years ago. There are things that aren't even important anymore, that were listed as like, with blaring headlights, or infrastructure that we listed as a resource that actually disappeared, or a new one that came in. So, things like the service line that are now, much bigger part of our lives that even 7 years ago weren't. So I kind of think of it, we're more moving in the direction of creating guiding principles in each of our missions, and then, picking carefully things that are sort of a little bit more evergreen than others. And I think that we have the School of Medicine, just like you got everybody here, and the service line and the institution. And I always think of it like, how do you kill two birds with one stone? What is it that would be a really great strategy that you do one thing and you get, you serve multiple purposes. So we're working kind of on how to think about convergence in this process. To make it less effortful to us, instead of having like 10 strategic plans for each of the different stakeholders of the department.
Yep, great idea. But yeah, so you heard a little bit, everybody has a little bit different approach. There's institutional, there's medical school, there's the big ones versus the more focused ones. So there's a lot of variability out there, and there's probably no right answer. Everybody has to make it work. And obviously, when there's change at the top, believe me, sometimes strategic plan changes across the whole institution. And neurology is obviously one department in a larger network. So let's get into a couple of the nuts and bolts. I wanted to hear and ask Matt a little bit, how do you start preparing and developing a strategic plan? When we're part of institutions, whether it's part of the academy, ANA, other structures, we all have gone through some of this. We go together in a retreat. Tell us a little bit in a departmental strategic plan. You already touched on this idea of the goal, mission, vision. Tell us a little bit, Matt, what's the best way to start?
Okay, thanks, Ralph. So starting with a mission and a vision, you have to start imagining what's the possibility space. How do I get there? And part of that is you have to know where you are to know where you're going. So you have to do some sort of intelligence. And, there are different ways of doing that. One of them is to do a needs analysis, which could be informal and just asking around or doing a survey of your department heads. We do a thing that probably a lot of you know about called a SWOT analysis. And the SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's sort of divided into internal and external. The strengths are, what Francis was saying, thinking about your department, what makes it shine, what's great about it. And the weaknesses are like, what's missing, what's not so good. You can learn a lot about that from just reflecting, talking to your division directors and hearing from the faculty. And then the opportunities. What's around you that you can use to make your department better and to meet your vision and mission? And then the threats. What's not so good out there, like COVID or IT, or can't hire people of a certain type that you need. So you get this intelligence, you assemble it with the help of everybody. I believe in shared decision-making. And then you get this intelligence and you make the plan out of it. You mull it over and you've got to ask yourself, what matters? What do we want to achieve? What are our best opportunities? And shop it around to people. Ask your division directors, your faculty, your advanced practice providers, the administrators, your staff, meet with them alone, meet with them together, meet with them off campus, meet with them in focus groups. If you need space, do an architectural thing, a charrette. And then you got to figure out, how do I get the resources to make this happen? What are the impediments? Who do I need to talk to? So consult with your dean, talk to the head of the hospital, talk to the CFO, talk to the CMO, the chief operating officer, and talk to your allied departments. You're in a service line, talk to neurosurgery, talk to anesthesia pain, talk to physical medicine and rehabilitation, and get together and then figure out, what are my best opportunities? What's the lowest risk and highest payoff, and lowest cost? What's moderate? What shouldn't I even think about? Figure out, what can I get done? What are the gains that I need to get done in the shortest period of time? And then figure out, is it worth it? So start doing calculations on return on investment. It could be financial, but it could be things like social return on investment, like with DEI, that has a great payoff socially down the line. How do I figure that out? So that's a basic framework for how we do things, and we do it every year.
Every year. So you touched on a lot of things, and we'll probably, be able to go into a little bit more detail on others who are dealing with that. But the issue of data, the SWOT, which is important, and then the mission and vision. So did you create your own mission and vision statement, get around with a small group of people to develop this, or was it top down, or how did you develop a mission and vision statement?
So naturally we had a notion of what the institution wanted to do, but we have our own ideas, and we thought about, how do we do this? And we came together in the middle. And as we do this, we're also talking with leadership, like the C-suite and the dean. And by the way, once in a while, you have consultants coming in, and you have to learn how to work with them as well. And you don't have to drink all the Kool-Aid, but sometimes they have very good ideas.
Yep, no, that's important. And I will say, when we did ours in the beginning, when money was flowing perfectly, we had a consultant even come in right to the department that helped us. And if you can get that kind of help, either from the institution or externally, that does make an important point. You also touched on the idea of data that's needed. So David, tell us a little bit about, data gathering is not easy. Where do you get it from? The hospital, the institution, outside resources? What data do you feel is important and do you need to gather when you start thinking about a strategic plan?
Well, I think the data depends upon the what you're planning. So the mission statement for our hospital network are very different and really relate to location and strategic plans around whereas our strategic plans and data or clinics that we're setting up around the state are very dependent upon patient volume, competition, there, who patients are going to now, the sort of metrics that every population density, where patients are they going into, for us, are they going to New York, are they going to Philadelphia or Boston, what we want to try to capture in Connecticut. The scientific is much more opportunistic, a lot of it related to philanthropy. If one has a donor who's given a great deal of resources for a particular program, then that will change our strategy. So I think all of these, I'm just seeing is my voice cutting out now?
No, well, it's better now. Yeah, you cut out a little bit in the beginning. It was okay.
So but I mean, in terms of the clinical aspects, much of the data we acquire relates to competition, who is there,
Yep.
Patient, all the sorts of things that are reasonably obvious.
Right.
Consultants come in and measure for us, and we sit there with the service line, the hospital, looking at these data. One of the interesting questions is the integration of the hospital with the medical school, and that's been a challenge, but I think we've worked it through, where we have representatives from the medical school, the medical group, and representatives from the hospital working together to come up with a joint strategic plan, which we hadn't done previously, and that's been really valuable.
Yeah, that's helpful. And we're going to talk about integration in a minute. So, data like third available, what's the wait times to get in? Do you have a big demand for headache and you don't have any headache people in the department? Competition, in a larger city like Philadelphia, where there are other health systems, where can, obviously, and Philadelphia I know was Penn, but in In New Haven, you have less competition. In Miami, we have less competition, at least for academic, but we have a lot of competition when it comes to other health systems that are even private. So those things can be taken into account when you're doing your data planning. It helps to get some outside support. And you talk a good point about, obviously philanthropic support. And you mentioned earlier about integration with neurosurgery and other departments that may be important for driving some of
I would
these
just interrupt and say that
Sure.
that data
Yes, Brian.
gathering process is a great role for service line.
Yes.
Because, that is in their wheelhouse and they should be doing that. Very few departments have data managers and
Right,
COOs
right.
that have time to do that kind of stuff and look at the market. And we found that I found real value, even from the early days of our service line in
Right.
that aspect for sure.
Not all places have developed service lines though. And we have some work ongoing with the Academy to talk about service lines because, for example, service lines are not as well developed at my place. Service lines sound like they're very well developed at Penn. So it is important to figure that out. Let's talk a little bit with that whole idea in mind for Kevin in terms of integrating a departmental strategic plan with the institution. We keep hearing about the health system, the medical school, they may have strategic plans. How do you ensure alignment, with what you develop in the department with some of these larger entities that you're part of?
Yeah, I actually think this is one of the most important pieces of a strategic plan. And personally, I think that's the case because if you want support from your organization for your strategic plan, you better make sure that it's aligned with their priorities. I also think that we all ultimately want to accomplish the strategic plan and mission of the organization. And so in order for us to do that, we've got to make sure we've got really good alignment. One of the ways that we approach that at Emory have historically and have found success is engaging our strategic planning office. Oh. So we're lucky enough as part of a large academic medical center that I could actually, as a service line leader, reach out to our strategic planning office and have one of them come in and actually help support our strategic planning effort. And they actually bring all of that knowledge with them. So yeah, I could go pick up the strategic plan. We do that, and I could look at it and understand where ours aligns and where it doesn't. But it's even better having someone from the strategic planning office who helped develop that plan with our executive leadership actually come in, help us develop ours, both in terms of giving us support in doing that, but also making sure that we've got really good, solid alignment.
That's a great resource. Do all of you have a strategic office? I had one, but the chief keeps changing. They keep getting a new one in. So, but that's a great resource.
They've not been that strategic then.
Well, they've been strategic, but they keep changing the strategy. So, but important. If you do have those kind of resources, a strategic officer, a chief strategy officer for the health system, or obviously the medical enterprise, the academic enterprise, it's critical to interface with them. At our own place, for example, when I was doing, I got the CTSI involved because I know they were great with strategy and they got involved more for the research side. So Todd, we're talking a little bit about this and you nodded your head saying that there wasn't a strategic planning office. Does your health system or medical school have the strategic plan that you've been adopted, or you mentioned that it don't really have one? Tell us a little bit about what's going on and why.
So we're kind of in a new chapter in our school enterprise. Our hospital historically had been owned by HCA. And 2 years ago, we raised funds, floated debt, bought the facility. And so we've been kind of treading now, becoming this new entity. We're crawling towards financial integration, eventually towards total integration, starting to develop service lines, things that we haven't had really much in the past. We've more lived in silos. So, we're kind of where Emory was probably 20 years ago. So we're hoping to move forward with that. But so actually, funny enough, I actually sent an email to the dean's office, said, do we have a strategic plan? Because I remember years ago, we kind of had one, but I hadn't heard anything about it. And they're like, well, yeah, we kind of do. Clinically, not really right now. We're kind of, living month to month and development by development. We opened up a whole new bed tower about 3 months ago, I think. So, you know, there's a lot going on that's and then COVID's changed what we're going to do with the bed tower. And so we've kind of had a whole lot of things going on, some planned, some unplanned. And so the research and the academics, that again, none of this has been dusted off probably in 5 years.
Yeah.
And so there's not really a current plan. We're probably kind of still living research and academically with the plan from 15. And the clinically, it's kind of morphing daily as some of these committees form and as things are happening to move us towards this one system. So that's kind of where we are again. And priorities change very quickly here, as I'm sure they do at all your facilities, but our neurology department's pretty small. We only have about 20 faculty, where a lot of you are 40 or 50 or 80 or, and so, you know, you lose, we don't have deep benches in a lot of subspecialties. And so, you know, we lose somebody that we didn't plan on losing. That's our only movement disorders person. Okay, now we're in crisis because we don't have movement. I mean, we tend to get reset a lot on our, you know, we have a plan and then the curveball comes and totally kind of upsets. And so we're kind of, you know, we're kind of treading water, I think, at the current moment.
Well, you're under a lot of flux, it sounds like. In
Yes.
terms of, it sounds like the university has bought the hospital.
Well, the state,
some entity,
a not-for-profit, which were university is a wholly owned part of the state.
Right. Yeah, and we went through the same thing when we bought a HCA hospital on the campus. University purchased it. That changes things, and that's a big dynamic change. Hopefully, once you get through that, then some clinical strategic planning could develop. These are the external forces that we were talking about that have to be taken into account when those change. Just as a chief strategy officer changes, a dean changes, a donor comes in with a big amount for brain health, you know, those things will all of a sudden change the prioritization of some of the strategic planning. You know, we touched on, everybody's been mentioning clinical, but, you know, a lot of our mission is research and particularly basic and translational research. Francis, you know, from your department, that, you know, where research is also a big part of your department. Tell us a little bit how you've integrated, say, if you had to deal with clinical research, both basic and translational strategic planning.
So one of the things that we started to do several years ago is, I've talked about this before, so this idea of DeSoloing the department. And, you know, you might have stroke, you might have epilepsy, you might have MS, but you have neuroinflammation. You know, you might have epilepsy, brain tumors, but you have neuroengineering. And so this has been very helpful, things like gene therapy, engineering, inflammation, these neuroinflammation that go across multiple disease sets. So it stabilizes those research programs because they aren't linked to a single clinical entity that could be like a single point of failure for it. And it broadens this idea of balance because, you know, you want to always, the way we've been trying to look at it is you want to balance the clinical with the basic around some topic, right? And so sometimes when you come into the department for the new chairs and even the old chairs, you come in and you find you have the fabulous clinical stroke division, but you have like no one doing any research in anything that even remotely has, you know, basic or even translational in that area. And so you want to kind of I try to balance where I have a very strong clinical enterprise. I feel obliged or obligated to build some kind of a research enterprise to balance it, and vice versa. The other is quite often you have an incredible, you know, gene therapy research program, but no clinical platform. So what we've been working on is thinking strategically about where do we need to build the clinical platforms? Where do we need to build the back end of the, you know, the research, the discovery piece? And at Penn, one of the things I've been trying to sort of exploit is they have something called funds flow, which really is a way of kind of returning some of the clinical revenue back into the research and connecting. In our institution, as probably many some of the people on this call, the medical school and the health system are one. They're not two separate competing or, you know, independently run entities. And so that what part of the process then in strategic planning is to think about where am I going to get return on investment on the clinical, like with gene therapy, which we saw, right, with SMA and Spinraza, massive downstreams. And how do we put that back into the research enterprise? And kind of constantly looking for that return on investment either at one end or the other of this sort of cycle. But I think of it more as a cycle. And if we can demonstrate we have the cycle, then I think it's worth strategically prioritizing.
Yeah, great point. And I love the idea of like neuroinflammation. So David, I'm going to turn to you. Probably neuroimmunology goes across your whole department, right? Or are there ways?
Immunology? No, never.
Never.
So,
Never.
so it's an interesting point about crossing disciplines, crossing departments. One of the things, let me just say just one point about, we have two separate institutions, the hospital and of course the medical school. Way I look at it, and I hope they're not on the line, is that I have two pockets to pick rather than one. So that's a certain advantage. In terms of the science, I mean, I never thought inflammation would become as important as it has. As an MS researcher, it was always obvious that would be important, but its role in Parkinson's, potentially Parkinson's, Alzheimer's.
Stroke too.
Yes, we have Lawrence Ansing, who trained at Penn. So it's become clear it's important. So what Yale has done is, in terms of the university, and this is interesting, and probably somewhat unique, the university decided on 5 priorities. They had about 120 different presentations. 2 of them relate to the things at the university side. But in terms of the university, not the medical school or hospital, but university fundraising, the number 1 priority was neuroscience. The number 2 priority was inflammation, and number 3 was data science. So I sort of won on that one. And we're setting up a Center for Neuroinflammation, and it's integrating across the neurosciences. Immunobiology is a major part. And in fact, we will be a bridge center between an inflammatory disease center, headed by Ruslan Metsitov, and a neuroscience institute. And then we will be the bridge between it. So I think what Francis said is critical. One wants to not be departmental. I think departments do in science more harm than good, and try to be strategic in crossing disciplines. So part of our Center for Neuroinflammation will be data science. We have computational biologists and mathematicians that will be part of it. Stroke will be a big part of it. Brain tumors a big part of it. Obviously, MS, macular degeneration will be a big part of it. So that's how we're strategically looking at the sciences.
So the idea of your own local environment, like for example, at our place, there's a whole interdisciplinary stem cell institute. So how do we bridge with them for stem cells for, as you know, all different areas, just as like there's a huge institute for genetics. If that's a strength at your own individual campus, then how does your department connect in with those resources where there can be a real good cross-departmental return on investment? So Kevin,
Absolutely.
I wanted to go to you now a little bit. You know, we haven't heard anything about education. Also, we've heard about research, we heard about clinical. How do you say separately align and best balance missions? And maybe let's touch a little bit on education as part of the strategic plan as well.
Yeah, sure. So we do in fact have goals for each one of our missions. And the way that we accomplish that is really 2 ways, I guess. Number 1 is we are very specific with who we engage as part of our strategic planning activities. And so we will certainly engage our vice chair of clinical affairs. We'll certainly engage our vice chair of research, our vice chair of education. And so where there are organizations that have roles like this, it's really important that we're engaging our leadership and faculty and staff that participate in our various missions, because they're going to bring a viewpoint with their specific area of interest and focus. We also kind of force rank. In other words, we might say we're going to be focusing on our 3 missions. Let's think about what are our 3 goals for our clinical mission, what are our 3 goals for our education mission, for example. And we really seek to kind of force people to think in those different silos, even if ever so briefly, so that we can then bring it all together and have one strategic plan across the department. I will say that there have been times in the past when we really needed to focus on, for the next year, our strategic plan was coming to an end. We weren't quite ready for another 3 to 5 year plan. We wanted to develop a 1-year plan. And really what we needed to focus our energy on was our clinical mission or our research mission. And instead of trying to force it and develop some big plan that's going to touch every mission, knowing that all of our energy and focus is going to be in a specific area, we have just narrowed the scope and said, for this year, we're going to develop an operational plan in this specific area of focus. That doesn't mean that we won't next year then restart our cycle, but let's just call it like it is, basically. And so that's helped us, I think, not waste people's time and not develop plans that end up sitting up on a shelf somewhere for our other missions when we know we're going to focus in one specific area.
So that's an area of strategic redirection that can occur, or reprioritization depending on what goes on, which is a great example. When we've done it, we've also split the group up and had breakout sessions where the clinical, the research, and then the educators can come together, but then come everybody back together to share with the whole group to get that crosstalk going. I have a couple questions coming in that I'm going to deal with in a moment. I wanted to first turn to Francis.
I would make a comment.
Yes, go ahead.
I want to make a quick point about education. I think something that
Yes,
we've set up, which I think is really important. We like to have medical educators in each of our different divisions to develop curriculum, fellowship training, and we now have a master's program in education administered, which is predominantly for fellows and junior faculty, where they become trained in curricular development, just educational principles.
So clinical educator development, as opposed to research and clinical, or both? Or
research. Well, the master's degree is in education.
Education.
So learning theory, curricular development. You wouldn't walk into a lab to do molecular biology without training.
Right.
And so our feeling is that, and we expect everyone to learn how to teach, medical students and residents, but we want to have a cadre of individuals who do medical research, educational research.
Right.
We're trained in qualitative as opposed to quantitative research and have the training to do it. And it's been extremely valuable. Now I have 5 medical educators in the department.
Yep, that's terrific. So before we get to a couple of the questions, and I see a few more coming in, well, actually, here's one that's just specific, David, to what you're saying. How are you funding the master's in education? That's directly to what you just talked about. How would you fund that? Is that an institutional, or is that in the department?
Departmental. It's not that expensive, and we just fund it.
Okay,
but what it becomes an incredible recruiting tool.
Yeah,
for fellows and faculty.
Yep, I agree.
So it's yes, so it's departmentally funded.
So,
but the medical school puts in things to help it keep going.
Great. This year, well, 2020 actually, it was a big year for issues with systemic racism. And so as we think about strategic plans, I thought it'd be helpful to hear a little bit from Francis and how maybe the strategic plan may have dealt with issues of anti-racism or specific issues regarding equity, diversity, inclusion, or mentorship for particularly underrepresented minority. And I know, Francis, you've done some great things with your diversity officer. Just tell us a little bit how that got integrated into the strategic plan.
Yeah, actually, several years ago, we established a vice chair of inclusion and diversity. And so it sits as one of the pillars in my executive committee of, clinical research. I vice chairs for these things: clinical research, education, faculty development, and diversity. So it's sort of, that topic sits as an independent force, just as the others, because it integrates, as they all do, with each other. So I think it's important to actually make sure you have a leader that in that can start to lead groups and committees, a vice chair that can champion this. But it's not just for diversity of faculty and trainees, but also of the culture and also of staff, because the administrative staff can be very different in terms of their background than some of the faculty, for instance. And also not to forget the public health disparities and the care platforms. So there's actually kind of a lot that I think a lot of things that this entity of the diversity group connects with. It's not just sort of faculty development. But around faculty development, because you mentioned that, it does require a unique, I think, search process, something that you have to go above and beyond. Often in a faculty search, we've done pretty well. I mean, everybody can do better. We're trying constantly to increase the diversity of our faculty. And what we note is that just simply putting out a ad you know, in the green journal or in that blue journal or wherever you put it out, and then just say, well, let's just wait. And then we'll just, you know, there's going to be diversity and people come in. Not necessarily. You have to actually be very active in going to the right places to extract candidates and recruits from places that might be rather non-traditional. And for that, you need to have a vice chair that can help and understand that whole, you know, places that you could go. And then once they are in the process of search, we have a diversity search advisor for every single search. It's actually the school insists upon that. I'm sure everybody has that. But once they're in the door, I think we have mentoring of all our assistant professors by mentoring committees. By the way, twice a year they have to meet, and then they fill out a form, and that I have to see it. The division chief has to see it. We're realizing that we have to often pay a little bit of extra attention to some of our diverse candidates, in that they haven't necessarily had the traditional background and may have sort of unperceived gaps in places. So we're really trying to increase our sort of our sensitivity around what that looks like, but also try to help them find where they may have strengths because of their different background, bring that into the department and build on those differences. So it's kind of a bi-directional thing that is evolving, obviously, but that's kind of where we started.
So, I mean, I think the key is that you have it integrated structurally, as you said, in your department. So if it's so strongly integrated into the structure, the culture, it's pervasive in the strategic plan, and that makes a huge difference. We have an outside question that's come in. I'm not sure who's best to answer this. It talks about, in thinking of a SWOT assessment within neurology as a whole, I believe that burnout, also known as moral injury, is a great threat to the health of physicians. You know, burnout has been a big theme for many of us. Will the panelists share successful strategies, or maybe the better question would be, how in our strategic plan are we dealing with strategies to identify, implement, prevent, and remediate some of the causes of burnout? Oh, Matt, go ahead. You got your hand up first.
So for sure, threat, the burnout is a threat. And, you know, I hear about it all of the time from our division directors and the faculty. And what you have to do is dig down and, you know, do a needs analysis and needs assessment and figure out what's wrong. There's usually a reason. You know, the person may have feel that they have a pressure for RVU generation, and maybe it sort of, the plan would be to adjust number of RVUs. Or it might be that a clinic is working very badly because it's understaffed, and it's maybe at the level of the hospital that's staffing the clinics. So then the question is, do we need more people to answer the phones and triage the patients better? Do we need another nurse manager? So, you know, when you dig down, you have to isolate it to the point of where's the problem, the root cause analysis, and then see what you can do to gather funds to fix it. You know, these are always logistical problems that can be fixed.
Right. And some burnout points, as you say, could be personal versus larger that go across multiple. RVUs is always a good example. Outside regulations that are affecting our lives, work-life balance, these things are big and require us to at least make sure they're included somewhere in the strategic plan. Another outside question, this one may go to, I think the good one for Francis. Neuro service lines, bringing key folks together, they're very positive. However, is there any loss of autonomy depending on who leads the line and some effects as a result of that?
I think that is a definite potential threat of service lines. And I think it takes a lot of effort to continually insist upon alignment of the service line's goals with what the department is trying to accomplish. And rather than the department pivoting constantly to something that's been decided by people who aren't domain experts. So I think holding a leadership position in a service line for neurology is key, and having a way to use your domain expertise to guide it, but align with what they're doing. And obviously we need to integrate with PM&R, and we need to integrate with neurosurgery, all that. But I think that if you don't persist persevere at having a
Mhm.
voice, whether you're the official director or not, things don't go as well. It becomes very discoordinated. It has a sense of like too many cooks kind of thing. It's suddenly
Right.
your faculty are being tapped by these people from outside the department and da da da. So I think just really trying to stay on top of it and really educating the service line as to what the department feels is important really helps diminish those little hiccups and big hiccups that can occur.
Right, for sure. Matt, I want to turn to you about engagement a little bit. We've talked about mission, vision, SWOT. We've talked about, breakouts off campus, on campus. How do you engage the faculty and division chiefs to develop the strategic plan? Not just implement now, more on the development side, in terms of some nuts and bolts ideas about that in the planning phase. If you have a huge faculty, do you get everybody together? Do you get some together? What are some, just some tips you have there?
I believe strongly in shared leadership. I think that people hate to have things crammed down their throats from the department head, from the hospital, from the medical school, from new regulations. I think a key to getting buy-in is to value the division head's opinion, the faculty opinions, and to solicit it and to use it and to solicit their imagination. They know where the opportunities are. They know what the problems are. So listen to them very closely. And when you do, and they feel engaged, they'll really care about what happens. So include them at every opportunity in the SWOT, include them in the strategic planning, have them help you sort and prioritize all of the different ideas that come in, because you're not going to be able to afford all of them. But they'll help you to do that, and so in short, the idea is to engage and solicit opinions and to use those opinions so that they can see what I think matters. This is my department. This is not just the department that I work in.
Right. It shouldn't be top down. I agree. I always say, 1 minute, David, it always has to be engagement. If you get the people to get engaged at at all aspects of the academic pyramid, so to speak, I think it'll be better. Even with staff and administrators getting engaged in the development of it, then everybody will take ownership. David, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to make one point related to what Matt was just saying, and obviously bring the department together and listening to vision chiefs are important. But one of the major conflicts I've seen is that you have to make decisions, and this is about well-being, between what's best for the individual as opposed to what's best for the department or the institution. And my feeling has been that Yale's been around since 1701. No matter what I do, it's going to persist after I leave Earth. And the individuals that are much more vulnerable are the faculty, staff, and students. And I think in making strategic decisions about what needs to be done, that to keep faculty, not to have the burnout, but to have the faculty feel that you care. Now, sometimes you just can't do what they want, but I think the basic attitude of what's best for the faculty as opposed to what might be best, get a bit more views or a bit more financial gain, you end up losing at the end of the day. And I think that's a really important point in terms of running an enterprise.
Fully agree. It's important to thinking about all parts and the faculty and critical. We're going to move now to, it's a question, but also one of the questions we're going to touch on. And Francis, this is, I think, towards you, which is these quantifiable goals, measurable goals. The question that came in was, can you discuss key performance indicators, which I think fits with some of the goals? How specific do these need to be? How to differentially weigh them across strategic plan objectives? It's all about metrics. So what can you tell us about some of the goals and quantifiable goals?
Yeah, I mean, we have a wide variety of issued, Press Ganey, Vizient, all these things, US News and World Report. We've got goals. We've got numbers and data, and then we have local market data. But I just want to key back on something that Matt mentioned about engagement of faculty. And I think this is the time, the place where you engage and establish champions, domain champions in your department to self-define some quantifiable goals and metrics that they feel comfortable with. And you might rather than have it shoved down your, your necks by somebody in marketing saying, we need, this percent of people, new
Right.
patients per day or week or in this much time, really talk about like the why and then what can we do? And I think that that's, first of all, you get people to be more obviously participate, engaged, but it feels like it's come from within. And that changes everything. If it's something we feel we've done for ourselves or to ourselves, maybe, but it's not an outsider so much. So where possible, trying to, to reinterpret and repackage some things that get to the same point as what the stakeholders, the external stakeholders, who you have to listen to, and you need to listen to the stakeholders and what they value,
Right.
but to modify them and interpret them a little bit so that people feel like it's the department deciding on this. It's
Right.
us, it's my division, it's me, it's my group. And you've got to have some of that authorship of that, I think, in there.
That's key. Kevin, I'm going to turn to you also as a business administrator. Business administrators are always learning from their MBA backgrounds and whatever about metrics. What can you say about goals and metrics in your strategic plan?
Yeah, I think one thing that we have found that is really, really critical is to ensure that you've got measures that actually mean something to people at every level. So, to say we're going to have a neurology department that is in the top quartile for recommend your provider for patient satisfaction. Anybody ever had that goal? No, nobody's ever had that goal.
Right.
So that means something to me. That means something to our department chair. What does that ultimately mean to the medical assistant that is helping support our movement disorders clinic on Thursday morning? And so we have really tried to push on turning that, which we ultimately know is important, the big dot, as I call it, into smaller dots to say, what can the MA on Thursday morning do to influence that larger dot? And actually develop goals at the front lines that ultimately make it into folks' performance reviews that help support those bigger dots. And so until you make it mean something to people, people are just going to see that as just another measure that we're going to get reported on at the end of the month for the year. And we may hit it, we may not. And if we do, great. We all celebrate with a pizza party. And if we don't, well, I didn't have anything to do with that. Right. So how can we make it meaningful to the folks at every level of our organization is really something that we've tried to focus on.
That's great. There was another outside question here. It fits with clinical. Patient access is a constant struggle and often a key metric. How many more can we see? X number of increase, how quickly, how do you balance that structure that enables the subspecialists to carve out their niches, complicated patient cohorts and research, while keeping the goal of increasing access to patients in clear focus? And that's always part of a strategic plan. Anybody want to try to grab that one? Go ahead, Francis.
I have one word, APPs.
Yes.
Nurse practitioners.
Yes.
In many of the fields, it's been a godsend, and also using instructors, who are now credentialed to see patients independently can be very helpful. But really reserving your subspecialists to the high content, high complexity new patients as much as possible, and figuring out a way to distribute some of the follow-up patients is really, really key. And we've had a lot of trouble with our access center, it's an institutional access center. It's like, I hope nobody from Penn's listening, but it's like impossible. And we've had to take in we've created a nurse navigator to sort of help move people around and double check on these misdirected patients. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and it's rather sad because we all, and I know everybody's department listening to this is saying we're precision medicine, we're personalized care, and yet these patients are calling this person like, hello, it's Penn, okay, I'll find something for you. And it's just not what they are expecting. And so it's dissonant with what we say we're providing. So we're in the middle of struggling with that, but the APPs have really helped. The nurse practitioners have really helped. And also, just to say, the nurses We started we tried APPs with certain groups, and it tended to be a bit confusing for some subspecialties. So we've added more nurses who really can smooth things over,
Right.
and create less work below the licensure of our
Yep.
specialists.
That's helpful. Advanced practice providers have been a big area of focus. The Academy has been doing a number of things to advance their career and educate them. You know, there's a training that has to occur for advanced practice providers. And at the annual AAN meeting, we have some other workshops planned for helping APPs improving access. We're getting towards the end here, but I wanted to touch on implementation and execution. You have this great thing, you've created it, has all these strategies, has measurable goals. How are you going to get it going and across the department? David, do you want to touch on that briefly?
That's sort of the tough one. How do you get actually, how do you actually get it going? Well, I think things have been said already. The point that Matt and Francis made, that the engagement of the division chiefs, I believe, is absolutely critical for implementation. And because ultimately they are on the front line, and to get their buy-in in terms of whatever the process, whatever the vision might be, is probably the most important aspect of getting it going. The business manager in the department is also critical in terms of interfacing with the fund flow and how that works, be able to pay for it. But I think the main way of changes that we institute are really done through the division chief, who actually implement, who identify the recruits, identify the APPs, and really drive it.
And I think Matt touched on it earlier and talks about continuing to talk about it, get it out there. You have, I call it a draft that's always going through change, and get it out there and communicate it again and look at progress over time. Go ahead, Matt.
I just want to add that you also need to make sure you have the resources to get it going, and a solid commitment from the hospital, and you also need to have a point person who's engaged, might be a division director or somebody else, who's going to follow through and make sure it happens and is passionate about it, so that you don't have diffusion of responsibility and nothing gets done.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've talked about all these incredible, some of these plans could be big and they could be expensive. So where the resources come, how do you convince leadership that these are important investments to make that will have a good return? That kind of goes into the prioritization process, and then what the individual priorities are at either your health system or your medical school. So this was a lot to do in 1 hour. As you know, we covered a lot. It was just a little bit on the surface, but to give you an idea from a lot of different departments' perspectives, academic, business administrators' perspectives of what it takes to do some strategic planning. We look forward to trying to provide more in the future through the AAN and other organizations to help you develop them. I know as a new chair, when you're coming in, it's always exciting to do. It's a great way to get really knowing about the department. As an older chair, I will tell you, I've been thinking about doing it again, because it is a kind of a re-energizing process for you as well. So I'd consider it probably post-COVID. You may want to wait a little bit before you start doing it. I want to thank our panelists for doing a great job. Kevin, Todd, David, Francis, Matt, thank you very much for helping on this and being part of the planning of this. Look forward to seeing you again in the future. Stay safe and stay well. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you.